When tragedy strikes, the world's multi-billion-dollar news machine springs to life, telling us who, what, when, and even how. But the question so often ignored is why. In the teeth of disaster, journalists and theologians struggle with a question as old as humanity. If we're really governed by a loving God, why are terrible things allowed to happen? Today, join Lorna in conversation with best-selling author Philip Yancey, whose latest book, The Question That Won't Go Away, offers new perspective on this ancient debate. This is Context, a look at life beyond the headlines.
Welcome, everybody. We're going to present real life to Philip Yancey with 3 gripping stories around the question of why. Please welcome a writer and world traveler not afraid to face the tough questions about God, Philip Yancey. Great to have you, Philip. Thank you. Super. Wow. You know, Philip, you have made a career of this. It's been a long time of asking God the question why for you. And so if God is loving, if God is kind, he should protect us. But your journey to all this begins with quite a story about your dad. Tell us about you and your dad.
I have no conscious memories of that because I was only a year old, but this was the year 1950. And in those days, the great fear disease was polio. My father was only 24 years old. He was planning to be a missionary in Africa, and he contracted polio. And here he went from being a perfectly healthy young man to paralyzed. He couldn't even breathe on his own, so he was put in an iron lung machine, which did the breathing for him. He already had a group of several thousand people that he wrote in those days. He didn't email in 1950, and he would write letters, and these were his supporters, people who would pray for him, who were supporting him as he went to Africa. And they became convinced that he would be healed. They couldn't possibly understand why would God take such a young person with such potential. In fact, they became so convinced that he would be healed that they removed him from the iron lung. And in just a few weeks, he died. And in a sense, my whole life has been lived under the shadow of that event. These were well-intentioned people. They loved my father, but they were wrong. They were wrong about God's will. And what I learned early on is that it's important to figure out what we think about this whole problem of pain, problem of suffering, what God's will is. Because a lot of well-intentioned people, even today, make it worse. I heard this again and again when I was a journalist. I would interview people who were going through pain, and they would say, what was the hardest thing for me was that the church made it worse for me. I just wanted to get well.
Oh. You know, you cut your teeth on these stories, writing for Reader's Digest. Actually, I never missed a read of drama in real life. What did you learn about human nature, about people going through their drama in real life?
It's easy to think, okay, earthquake in Haiti, several 100,000 people die. Tsunami in Asia, a couple 100,000 people die. That's so much worse than, say, Newtown, Connecticut, where only 27 people died. It's not true. You can't quantify pain. You can't say, this is a huge pain, this is just a small pain. When it hits, it's 100% of you. And whether it's depression or dealing with a child with a birth defect or a parent who has Alzheimer's disease, pain is absorbing. It just takes all of you. And you can't quantify it. So that one of the things we need to do is just honor whatever pain someone is going through. It doesn't help to say, oh, that's nothing. Look at this tragedy over here. Look at this person over here. It's not true. For the person who's feeling the pain, that's all they've got. Pain is pain.
Philip, I remember a story I covered where it seemed to me where God was either unwilling to protect or unable, and it was the Amish schoolhouse shooting.
Yeah.
And this happened when a church-going, loving husband became a murderous gunman. He entered an Amish schoolhouse and he shot 10 girls, killing 5 of them before he turned the gun on himself. That story of forgiveness that unfolded, though, for this killer went viral. We were one of many thousands of reporters covering that at the schoolhouse. But they were very private people. The Amish didn't speak. Marie Monville, the shooter's wife, refused all interviews. She wrote, "I declined every media request. The media would reduce our horrific experiences into quick sound bites." Guilty. I know that stuff. But Marie is now ready to talk, and because she fits so well with the whole life practice you've made of studying this question of why, we've asked Marie to join us from Pennsylvania. She has told her story. I read about it in People magazine, but she's got it in a great new book called When Light Still Shines. Marie, thank you for joining us from Philadelphia.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Marie, it's been 7 long years since this crime. Why are you now ready to have the public understand your sorrow?
You know, when it first happened, there really wasn't anything that I could share beyond all of the events of the tragedy that were so widely reported. And I wanted a space for me to heal, for my family to heal, you know, my children, for us to just find the loving embrace of God. And in the time since, the questions that people ask have shifted from just wanting to know things about the circumstances of that day to how the Lord brought us through our tragedy, in the hope that, you know, they would find something that would help them move through whatever circumstances they were going through. And so for me, that was the motivation to tell my story, with the hope that I would be able to share the redemptive love of God in such a way that it would intersect the lives of other people who need Him as well.
Wow. I think that happened for us when, on the first anniversary of the crime, we did have an exclusive interview with your pastor, Dwayne, at the time, and he was protecting you from the press. How did your relationship with God help you answer this difficult question? Why?
You know, I think there are a lot of questions that we want answers to that there just aren't concrete answers to. You know, Charlie made choices, and what I've seen in my life is that God loves me enough to come exactly where I am and walk with me on the journey out. You know, the journey out of that valley, God has been there through every step of the way.
And you put all of this in a book, When Light Still Shines, and you start and end this book by saying, "Come discover a love story. I am forever a redemptionist." What's your advice for making a tragedy, and you've lived such a significant tragedy, what's your advice for making a tragedy a redeeming love story?
You know, it's really about just allowing God to intersect your heart and to bring His peace and His joy, you know, His hope beyond the circumstances, and to believe that He has more in store for you than what you're currently facing right now. You know, that He is continuing to write a love story over your life, and that He's trustworthy with it.
Yeah, Marie, thank you so much for putting it all down into When Light Still Shines. Many of us wanted to know the mystery of how you got through. You wrote so well. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Philip, you think there is a purpose for putting these stories either into print, interview like this. Why is it important we tell our stories?
There's one word that kept recurring as Marie was talking, and that's the word redeem. Redeeming love, she said, God's redemptive love. I have a friend named Jerry Sitzer who is a religion professor at Whitworth College in Spokane, Washington, and he went through a tragedy where a drunk driver going 85 miles an hour slammed into his car, and in the next 45 minutes he held his mother and his wife and his daughter as each died. And he later wrote a book about that, and he said a lot of words that start with R-E, the prefix re, are words that look back in the past. You rehab an old house, you rediscover something, but redemption is a word that looks forward. What can God make that is good out of something bad that happened? In fact, he said you could almost substitute the word recycle. So we take junk, things that we don't want anymore, we take them to a recycling center, and they're remade into something that is valuable and new and shiny. And that's what God promises. He certainly doesn't promise that bad things aren't going to happen. But what He promises is that even these bad things that happened, like Marie talked about, can somehow be used for good.
Okay, Philip Yancey, stay with us. We're going to go global on the question of where is God when massive suffering happens. And our audience question for Philip is going to come from Dave Toyson, who has 40 years experience leading World Vision into the toughest places of global poverty, disease, and war. Philip Yancey takes a question from Dave Toyson on the big question of why after this.